We were never trying to get hype about people quitting their jobs or chasing some influencer version of freedom or the soft life or whatever. We were trying to give people their sight back. Once you start thinking differently about where money can come from, the whole game looks different.
Yeah.
And that's how you win. Welcome to the Rich and Regular podcast, where we explore life at the intersection of money. I'm Kirsten.
And I'm Julian. And today we're talking about our book baby, Cashing Out. We're going to revisit some of the ideas in the book, some of the stories, some of our favorite parts, our lines, see if it still holds up. But first, I want to give a shout out to Tim Hartman. Sounds very, like I know
Specific.
This person. I don't. Like Tim Hartman. He left his full name. This is an actual review on Amazon of our book. It was entitled Great Quality and Exactly as Advertised. Great book. Also, LCB left us a review. The title of it was Buy It. This book is amazing and my new graduation gift for young adults. It's the book I wish I had when I was first starting out in my career. Even now, it's helping me to crystallize my pathway forward.
Oh,
Thank
I
you,
love
LCB.
that.
Thank you, Tim. There are hundreds of other reviews, but we would love for you to add to that because we really need that. It's so hard to get a review. We talk about that with the podcast, but with books, it is especially difficult. And so the more you review it, the more Amazon will recommend it to other people. And it's like a digital word of mouth kind of thing. So help us out if you've read it. Same is true for Audible or Goodreads or anywhere where the book is purchased. If you could leave it a review, 5 stars, leave a little nice note, maybe we give you a little shout out as well.
I love that. So, Cashing Out turned 3.
Yeah. I was trying to think about our son when he was 3 and he's 8 now. I kind of remember that would have been 2020. So that whole year was a blur for that reason, especially. But it is, in book years, it's different. Book years, are a lot faster. It's almost like accelerated dog years. And so our book being 3 is almost like a middle schooler.
Yeah.
I remember being a little concerned about whether or not the styling of the book would still hold up. And I'm glad that it has, because this 3-year, 5-year stretch is really important. You don't want to be wearing something absolutely crazy, that turns people off 2 years from now. But yeah, if we're lucky and fortunate, then you get a new cover, a new face, maybe add a couple new stats. We know a few other of our friend authors who've done that. But 3 years seems like it really, really flew by. I don't even remember celebrating 2 years. I'm sure we did. But as I think back to that period, there were so many things that stood out to me. Like I certainly remember our book tour. I was trying to remember all the stops and I always forget one because I start thinking about other projects and travel that we've done. But I think if I had to pick like one thing that really just stands out to me, it's that till this day, we still meet people. Like I remember meeting people we've met people multiple times who have traveled to and that we've met at one of our book tour stops. And then they came to something else that we've done or that we've been at restaurants and airports, conferences.
Yeah.
Like it's really, really cool. Yeah. It's been just really, really awesome, just meeting with people and hearing their stories and how the book has helped to crystallize or introduce new ideas to them.
Yeah, most books are lucky if they stay relevant for 3 months. So the fact that this book has taken us places we've never imagined or has impacted so many lives, it's just really eye-opening. I want to take us back to that release week, which, the book debuted as a #1 new release in several categories that day. And it still ranks in the top 250 books for budget and money management. And it's hard to say like which one because Amazon's ranking system updates every single hour.
Yeah.
So even staying within the top 1,000 is hard. It's a really competitive category. So staying in that top 250, sometimes it's 150, sometimes it's in the top 100. Staying there just means that there's consistent demand and it signals longevity of the idea.
Yeah.
I remember when we wrote Cashing Out, I read that for nonfiction books, it takes about 6 years for them to hit like the peak of their sales. And so we're about halfway there, and it's good to know that we're going in the right direction. The book has been featured by a bunch of different platforms, from the New York Times to Forbes to all kinds of shows and media outlets. We've seen it in college classrooms and college libraries. It's in the Yale bookstore. Somebody sent a picture of it when they were there.
Well, that wasn't my favorite. My favorite was my friend Jesus, who now lives in New York, and he was on a train.
Oh, yeah. A
And
subway sighting.
He was on the train and took a picture of a guy reading the book, and I was like, wow, like that really, really blew my mind.
Caught in the wild.
I was like, did you say something? He was like, nah, this is New York, baby.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it in corporate trainings. It's been barbershops, book clubs, even church groups. Like there's no limit. And the feedback truly has not slowed down. We are still asked to go places to talk about it, to sign it, things like that. And a lot of people are still saying, this gave me language for what I've been feeling.
Yeah.
Or in the case of the reviewer, like, dang, I wish I had had this when I was in college. And it's interesting because I was just talking to one of our friends and she said the same thing. And she was like, I actually was angry. Like I had to put the book down because I got mad that I didn't know or have this perspective before I went to school.
I get that.
Yeah. This episode isn't just about nostalgia. I'm not just going to keep going down memory lane, but it is about showing why the book still works in a world that has gotten even more chaotic from the time that we wrote it. Because 3 years in, cashing out still feels like a cheat code. Like even people who discover it today are just like, wow, I wish I had known this 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's not because the world has stayed the same. It's because we wrote it with that kind of change in mind. We kind of knew that things were changing and we wrote it so that it would last.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it is such an emotional journey going through the process of writing a book. I think writing a book like ours was particularly emotional because we are so connected to the community that we were trying to impact and reach. And I will admit, you know, very similar to the person you were referring to that said that they were angry when they were reading it. I was angry when I was writing it. You know, I remember, but I was also just confused. And I went through my own experiences trying to learn things. I remember when we were discussing AI, and I'm transitioning here because I want to start diving into elements of the book, like the parts that we got right. Because I really had to ask that question, like, what are some things that we were right about? And we have to ask that question because when you're writing a book through the traditional publishing process, you basically have to be making a prediction, right? You are writing something based on what you believe is going to be still true and or relevant, not just when the book is published, which typically is going to take 2 to 3 years out, right? So we bought or started writing the book in 2019 and 2020, and it wasn't released until 2022. That's normal. That is standard practice for the traditional publishing process. So what that means is as you are compiling your research and making your points or even crafting particular narratives, you want to make sure that it's something that you believe will still be relevant, not just when the book is published, but for the foreseeable future. And I remember reading about AI, and what's crazy is this was not the first time I'd read about it. Like this is something as someone, and I am completely admitting my, for lack of a better word, intellectual privilege here. I remember questioning whether or not we should even include AI because it felt like, well, that just seems like it's been overblown because I've been hearing about the threat of AI for so long. But then I realized that no, like I am at the time very much ahead of the curve. I remember having conversations with a close friend who was talking about someone else who was getting into the trucking business, and we had two completely different reactions to it. His reaction was, yeah, man, he's like, yeah, man, he's out here getting money. And my reaction was like, he's getting into the trucking business like in 2020? Like that sounds crazy. But I also remember being pretty reserved because I saw this flood of people, especially Black people, and this is not just my opinion. I remember New York Times covered it. Like they were particularly harmed because they were jumping into this dying industry. Meanwhile, here we were, you know, talented 10 style, you know, having read these articles, and I get it, it's cringeworthy, but it's also frustrating. We knew that this thing was going to be decimated completely. And so now here we are in the aftermath of it. A bunch of people put their life savings into these businesses and these industries, and they have nothing to show for it. And so I say all of that to say one of the things that we unfortunately, but, you know, were quite accurate in getting right was around the threat of AI. And now I think in 2025, a lot of us are admitting that, hey, man, this isn't just something that people are using on social media. There are jobs that no longer exist because they have been completely automated. And this is just the beginning. Let this be my next sort of warning. So when we do next year's or the 5-year or the 6-year, whenever it is, we can reflect back on that. But I mean, there's just a much bigger issue going on right now. And I think what we were really trying to get people to understand is that they need to wake up from this illusion of meritocracy in the workplace or the supposed value that they add or the strength of their relationships. I mean, I have very specific people and very specific roles in mind, like administrative assistants. People used to build an entire life around being an administrative assistant and being tied to this vice president or this person, only to be completely discarded and replaced by Calendly and plugins and ChatGPT and note takers and all of these things. I mean, I did some of those things in college, and it was taught to me as a valuable skill. And now those things just do not exist. And so all of that to say, we were trying to get people to recognize a connection between their jobs, their over-reliance on jobs, and their aspirations for building wealth. I mean, you cannot just rely on jobs. You have to start thinking forward. You have to start thinking about digital literacy, and you have to start thinking about entrepreneurship and ownership, not just as, a nice to have, but as a survival tactic. You have to find ways to create and generate income on your own. And that was one of the underlying messages that I think a lot of people overlooked because they were kind of more focused on some of the other parts of the book. But this is one that I think is definitely more relevant now. And I'm glad we said what we said when we said it.
Yeah. So this is all in chapter 6, which to your point, a lot of people didn't get to because they got mad. They got mad in chapters 4 and 5. But chapter 6 is called Whatever You're Thinking, Think Bigger. And it was really about that mindset shift that says following the rules is not going to be the thing that gets you free. That's not the country that you're in. That's not the system that you're in. That's not how it's set up. And so, yeah, it was full of all kinds of
uncomfortable truths
and proof to go with the claims, right? We were sharing AI data. We were sharing all kinds of data. And yeah, you're right. We were right. We were right.
Yeah, no, seriously, that's genuine reaction. Yeah. It's like we were right. And it really sucks because even now, maybe our viewers and listeners can hear a little bit of hesitance. It's because it's personal. We know families, we know people, we have friends whose livelihoods have been disrupted by this stuff. And so it doesn't necessarily feel good to be telling people that you love that probably don't even really listen to the podcast. But you know what I mean? Like, I know that life is not as sweet as it used to be. And I literally wrote the book about it.
Yeah.
And it sucks that you were not able to absorb that message and prepare for it. And now you're out here treading and really, really suffering. And it's unfortunate, but this is where we are. And it's
unfortunate, but it's not unsolvable, right? Like that's what the book is about. You have to be willing to address the identity hangups that you have related to your job and the skills deficits that you might have related to your job, and then move forward, right? The other thing that we were right about was this rigged leadership game. I remember writing about this in chapter 2, which is one of my favorite chapters of the book. Most people have read chapter 2.
I'm gonna give you.
Chapter 1 was real short.
3 times.
Chapter 1 was real short. I know. It's
that
hard
was
to
my
pick
favorite chapter. Maybe
it's hard
this
to pick a favorite chapter. It's like picking a favorite kid. But chapter 2 is my favorite because it challenges so many ideas. It really explains the concept of rich and regular and how cashing out fits in within that. And we open it with this story from our honeymoon, which was a bit of an emotional case study because we were supposed to be on our honeymoon unplugged. We had already taken 5 weeks from our wedding date to finish up some work that we still had and attend some conferences.
Dedicated.
Yeah. So we were so dedicated that we had waited 5 or 6 weeks. We were finally there, and we were there checking our email only to find out that one of our executives had left. And so I call it an emotional case study because it shows just how deep this thing gets, even when you intend and have planned and have structured your life around unplugging. The minute that bloop comes through, you are right back on that phone. And so we talk about, in that chapter, we talk about discovering FIRE and the reasons why we wanted to turn up the heat on our financial plan or strategy. We were already into personal finance, but when we discovered FIRE, we were like, oh, okay, that's something different. And we gave 5 reasons as to why we were pursuing it, because admittedly, it's a little shocking the first time you hear it, but we really broke down why we were pursuing it. And the second one was safety from constant corporate change. Back then, when we wrote the book, we were using data from 2019 because we were writing in 2020. We were using data from 2019 that showed that CEO tenure had been declining and was down to like 7 years, which is short for the leader of a company. Mm-hmm. And we talked about how all of those short-term leadership reshuffles, reorgs, basically create chaos for everyone else. Every time the C-suite flips, it triggers a new reorg, a new boss, a new strategy, and it just leaves all the regular employees scrambling. Fast forward to now in 2025, it hasn't stopped. It's gotten worse.
Yeah.
I think the average CEO tenure is now 5 years, and it's even higher in industries like tech and finance. I mean, the churn is just unbelievable. And it just reminds me that trying to build a career while the executives are playing musical chairs is practically impossible. And we wanted to free ourselves from that and show other people how to do it. You deserve a life where you are not constantly indebted to a world of endless requests because the company has new leadership and they just decided to do something different. And that includes leaders. I'm not just talking to like middle management. Even executives deserve a life where they have some level of stability. It's not just about the pay that they get. They absolutely do bake in golden parachutes and exit clauses so that they are not as affected. But you can't disregard the mental effect of having to switch and reinvent yourself and reintroduce yourself and fire more people and deal with more customers. That's also, it also wears on them. And so that chapter to me was so applicable widely to everyone and really just, I don't know, it just like every time I'm confused about why we're doing what we're doing, I go back and read that chapter.
Yeah. Even you just talking about it reminded me of why we chose to frame up that particular issue. And I think, I'm sure the word dignity will be used so many times throughout this conversation and this episode, but it's around giving yourself and protecting your own dignity. And by that, I mean, a lot of these leaders that step in and step out, it's not like when they step in, they don't pour their hearts out to you and rally the crew and tell you to shift your life and tell you to sacrifice your wellness and your relationships and whatever else you got going on. Like they want it all. They charge you up, they pour into you. And that's what happened to us. Like we really believed, like we felt like we had signed up. We said, all right, we are it. Like this is the moment we're going to rally as a team. And then not even a year later, they were like, actually, you know what? I'm good. I found a better opportunity somewhere else and I'm gone. And it felt like somebody had started a church.
Okie doke.
And then you showed up like the next week and there was like a close sign on the door. And it was like, wait a second, I was a believer. And it was just embarrassing, right? It was embarrassing for me personally.
Yeah.
And I just remember feeling like never again am I going to fall for the banana in the tailpipe. Like, I'm just not going to do it anymore. This is the last okie doke I will ever get called for. If it happens again, shame on me. And that's really like was the underpinning thing to your point. It's practically impossible to build a career unless you are sacrificing some really, really things that should not be sacrificed. And we just weren't really willing to do that. One of the other big issues that obviously, we're quite proud of, and I think stood the test of time, was around framing up financial independence as not just this mathematical exercise. And that's not a diss to any of the other platforms that over-focus on the numbers, but we took an intentionally different approach, no different than what we do here at the Rich and Regular podcast. And the reason for that is because I don't believe that these are intellectual exercises. These are emotional exercises. We're asking people to be more comfortable with uncomfortable truths, not with math that they disagree with. You can't disagree with the math. The math is just the math. What I'm challenging you to do is to revisit some of those beliefs to see if they actually hold up or to see if you have any evidence to actually support them. Because I've got a ton of evidence to support all of the claims that people consider to be radical or, anti-job or anti-corporate or whatever it is. I have evidence to support those things. And even if we're not talking about jobs, I think the way that I think about it, probably one of the clearest examples, and we said this casually just the other day, it must have been something we saw on television. And I said, you know what we don't need? Another book or another expert or another documentary or another expose on the problems with our food system. Because at some point, you kind of have to admit that actually the people just want what they want, right? They're making a conscious choice that I'm going to keep eating these things and I'm fine with it. Despite all the research, despite the books, despite the federal, state, local warnings that are placed on it, at some point people are still making a decision to say, I'm willing to spend money that I work hard for to give myself something that I know is not good for me. And that is America. And the same thing is happening in work culture and in our financial lives. And I think that is where those of us who are willing to change really need to recognize the value in taking radical self-responsibility
Yeah.
and protecting and shifting their own set of values. You have
Right.
to look at where you are and say, okay, if I plan on making something else with my life or doing something different, I cannot trust these one size fit all, generally accepted rules, because they were not designed for my values or my experiences in mind. The math is the math, but your mission is something that is completely different. When we talk about work culture, right, one of the things that I think is really interesting, but also quite frustrating, is how casually so many people communicate their hatred for their jobs. Like, we just
Facts.
generally talk about how much they hate our jobs. We bond on how much we hate our jobs. We go out for drinks and just bitch and moan and complain to each other about how much we hate our jobs. There's
Everywhere
data
except online.
everywhere except online, right? Like on LinkedIn, we all love our jobs, right? But
Thrilled.
yeah, but as soon as we log out, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this person, that person, my job, this industry, at all. I can't wait. I gotta, right? And that was one of the things that motivated us. But there's also just data to support it. I'm sure we quoted it in the book, but I don't remember exactly what it was. I've heard other quotes before. But a more recent Gallup poll showed that 60% of workers are emotionally detached and 20% are miserable. Miserable. That's how they describe themselves. So this is 80.
Typically, miserable is a word that other people use for you. When you self-describe as miserable because of
you're
work,
really miserable.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so since the book's come out, we've seen these other, cheeky terms. I think there was the Great Resignation for a while, where everyone was feeling froggy and jumping
Quiet
ship.
quitting.
There was quiet quitting, which was more like just general acceptance that things aren't really that great, and I'm going to start pulling back and protecting my time. And then everyone got really comfortable due to the rise of remote work, and then all of that got pulled away. And so I would imagine this misery will, climb, and so on and so on. And all of that to say, there are just two layers to this. We didn't talk about this enough in the book, but there is something to be said about protecting the family structure and protecting marriages. And I think that's what I think the best use case for financial independence is. It's not about the amount of money that you can make or finding creative ways to generate income. If nothing else, it is about protecting the community, which is made up of families, due to the threat of work culture. Work culture is eroding all of those institutions because it is so demanding, and it is leading to this kind of downstream spillover of all of the stress and the frustration. And it's just creating chaos despite it paying people less than they are actually worth. Like it's all of these things. And so it's a broken system. And what we were trying to help people do is to carve out and create a pathway so that they didn't have to rely on it as much as they are at the current moment.
Yeah. When you're talking about financial independence not just being a math equation, I remember there's a part in our book where we say that it's not a number, it's a feeling.
For sure.
And I remember the calculator nerds losing their mind, like absolutely losing their mind. And the reason we said that is because of exactly what you're describing. There are so many people that hit that number and still feel stuck. They don't quit. They don't slow down. They don't change the relationship that they have with this identity, this corporate identity. They wait for a layoff or burnout to give them permission. And we wanted people to stop treating freedom like it was a scoreboard. You have to define it for yourself. Like we talked about the big themes that we just, that still stick or that we were right about. But one of the little truths that was throughout the book that still hits is that you have to define enough for yourself. You have to define what enough is and what it looks like. Otherwise, you're always going to be on this hamster wheel chasing something that you can't define and don't know when you've had it. And so that's just exhausting.
Yeah, I think, if I had to say one more thing, there are probably a handful of things, when that day comes and it's time to add another chapter or a section, I think I certainly want to talk about grief, because I think grief, based on my experience with people who've read the book, is the true final stage. Like that to me is the door that a lot of people have to walk through before they then start to accept and adopt some of the things that we've taught them to. And what we're trying to encourage people to do is that you don't have to wait for loss, whether it's loss of loved one, loss of your sense of bodily control due to some kind of health issue, loss of a marriage or whatever. Like you don't have to wait for grief to change your life. You can actually take charge of your life now. You can actually pay attention to the evidence that's being presented to you right now and start devising a plan. And that's really my hope, is that, hey, don't wait. Don't wait until things are falling apart to recognize that the ship is going down.
Oh,
you know, like I'm telling you right now that there's plenty of data to support what's happening. Start acting, packing, and pivoting now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think even when I was talking to the friend who said she was angry after reading our book, she was asking me about what resources we're using to meet people in the moment right now, because nobody wants to hear financial advice. And it's like, I get that, but you can't ignore money. You can't ignore the role that money plays in our decision making. But I pointed her to the two references that I have found to be the most helpful. And it is references on grief, all 5 stages, and making people recognize what stage they're in, even anticipatory grief, and then addiction, making sure that people understand what it looks like to feel locked into a cycle that is harming you, but unable to get out.
Yeah.
And those two genres of help have been able to allow me to be more empathetic and to help people see themselves in a situation and still feel like there's a way out.
Yeah, I like that. All right, well then you can write those chapters when the time comes. Yeah, I will add to the list of little truths, now that we've gone through the big heavy stuff. But, there's still other aspects of work culture that I think are just as problematic, but not as massive. And I think it's just the result of, I think the technical term would be like specialization, meaning you have this role, whether you are a teacher or an administrative assistant or a marketer, and you have specialized so much in that role that you can't really see yourself outside of it, or you are so focused on getting a job that you can't imagine doing anything on your own. And that's certainly something that we've seen in the last 3 years since the book has been published, as many of our friends and colleagues and people that we know have dealt with layoffs and have tried to pivot into entrepreneurship. It's very clear to me that they're not following the 15-year career because they were starting from scratch, right? Like what you want to have done is struck out on your own while you still had that financial safety net. And I say that because there are so many people that I know that are doing it right now and learning very expensive lessons while also relying on this business and all of these new ideas to generate the level of income to replace the salary that they've still lost. That is what makes entrepreneurship really, really hard. What makes it more tolerable is if you have already figured out the seasonality, you've already built the scaffolding and the systems, and you already have a network of people that you can call. You already know who your customers are, who your customers aren't, which is actually more important than the former. And I think what we're seeing a lot of people now is that they are a result of being one-trick ponies for a really significant part of their career. They only know how to do one thing. They only think of themselves as one way. They don't realize that there are entire categories of skills that they can learn on their own, but they haven't developed those muscles because they've over-relied on their jobs, not just as a source of income, but as a source of development. And so they don't know what they don't know, and they don't realize that there are layers to their job that they don't need to outsource. But because they don't realize that, they don't even entertain certain ideas because they think it's completely far-fetched. And just using a random example, starting a podcast. A lot of people till this day don't realize how to start a podcast. Now, I'm not going to stand here and say it's simple, but it is certainly a repeatable process. It's not something that you would need to pay someone thousands of dollars before. I don't know if you remember when we met that young lady in Brownsville, Tennessee, if I'm not mistaken, and she told us that, she's working with some guy that, she was going to pay thousands of dollars to start a podcast. And I was like, for what? You can start a podcast for $100. Now, is it going to be a top tier podcast? No, but you don't need to pay someone thousands of dollars.
Right.
That's just one example. But I mean, these are all results of, the knowledge economy, if you will. People don't know what they don't know. And as a result, they're paying a premium to people that they believe know something that they don't.
Yes. And
they don't have the ability to learn on their own or be resourceful on their own. And that's one of the things that our book was really highlighting people to do, is to go through that process while you are still employed, so that when you walk away, you've built your exit ramp and you've figured out a lot of the problems already, so that you can actually cash out comfortably and not have to be so stressed out trying to make up for the income that you lost while you were still an employee.
Yeah, a lot of people take this as a personality trait, and it's not your personality. It's work culture. Work culture has made Americans into one-trick ponies.
For sure.
Like, it's not that you just only know how to do one thing or you don't know how to, you're not this type of person. I'm not a computer person. It's not that. It's just that you've spent so much time immersed in a system that taught you to only do one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're asking you to do 2 things or 3 things or 5 things. And it's like, oh, no, it's not who I am.
There's a department for that.
Yeah, no.
Like, well, not on your own. Like, you are that department. You're legal.
Yes.
You are tech support. You are the marketer. You
Yes.
are the copywriter. You are the administrative assistant. And yeah, it's going to be difficult at first. But once you realize it, you're like, oh, man, I didn't realize that you could just do that. That person's whole job for $40,000 can be replaced with a $9.99 monthly plugin.
Yeah, or a contract worker.
Or
who
a contract
just does
worker for a
3
quarter
things.
of it.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, most people have been taught to solve problems by either throwing money at it, which is a very corporate America kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Throw money at the problem and it goes away, or by working more hours. And one of the reasons we default to our labor is because it's the only tool that we've been taught. When you start to think about cashing out as a mindset, when you start to rely on building optionality and understanding that you deserve more than one option in most, if not all things, then you really start to feel the motivation to go out and make $1 outside of your job.
Yeah.
Just making that first dollar. That first dollar that you make outside of your job changes everything. We actually wrote about this, another one of my favorite quotes, but it says, over time, you'll start to develop a taste preference for income. Specifically, you'll be able to compare the quality of income from your job with the income earned independent of your job. And what that means is that you start to see your job for what it is, which is just a tool. It's not your whole identity. Once you've tasted income that doesn't cost you a commute or a meeting or changing your tone or a performance review.
Or your self-respect.
Or your
true voice.
Yes.
Or your sexuality.
Yeah.
Or your
hairstyle.
racial and ethnic presence.
Yeah. Yeah, it's real hard to go back to thinking that the only option you have is to grind harder. That default thinking that you only have one option and it's to go harder, it's to work harder, it's to spend more money, that is what we're trying to eliminate. That's what we mean when we say income gives you the perspective, especially if you give it a purpose.
Yeah.
That to me is the heart of cashing out. It's not about knowing all of this stuff before you jump into a decision or having the ability to be omnipotent and see where things are going. It's the mindset that you should always have at least more than one strategy, more than one option in all things. And it's the belief that you have to create that for yourself. And it's not just given to you or gifted to you by these institutions like you might have been told that it was.
Yeah, for sure. And again, even if it's not completely replacing your salary at first, that does not mean it should be ignored or diminished. There is value in that money because it solves some problem somewhere. This could be the money that you use to have a vacation. It could be the money that you use to have a better than expected vacation. Mm-hmm. It could be the money that you use to replace a cracked windshield, because Lord knows we're dealing with that right now. It could be the money that you use to solve a problem because you're financially supporting a parent, and now it's less pressure on your primary income because your side hustle or this idea that you're working out is solving for it. And so this is what we wanted to do. Start that process early. Give yourself at least 5 years to sort through what those pathways are, what works, what doesn't, so that by the time you're ready to jump ship, you figure those things out, you know what to do. You're not starting from scratch. You're building on top of what you've already done. And that makes the idea of leaving a cushy or comfortable job so much easier versus being forced to leave and then being forced to make this fresh fruit feed a family. It's like, man, you got a bag of oranges and that'll get you through a day. But what you really want to do is plant those oranges and give it some time to grow so that you have an orchard 5 years from now. Like, that is the real plan. And a lot of people just don't really have the ability to do that. And so hopefully we were giving them the playbook, giving them some ideas, and leading them to a brighter future.
Yeah, we were never trying to get hype about people quitting their jobs or chasing some influencer version of freedom or the soft life or whatever TikTok says y'all should be doing. We were trying to give people their sight back. We were trying to help you see that once you start earning money outside of your job, once you start thinking differently about where money can come from, the whole game looks different.
Yeah.
The entire thing looks completely different, and that's how you win. the world that we warned you about or talked about in 2020 isn't coming. It's here. It's here right now. But the blueprint still works. I remember writing it and Trump was in office. I remember writing it and things were far more racially sensitive, or at least they felt that way, than we had seen before. Like
Sure.
it was a very difficult time. And here we are, right back in it. Like we're right back in it. The blueprint still works. That's the point. So if you've been meaning to pick up Cashing Out, I strongly suggest that you do it today or gift it to someone who needs a plan. The link will be in the show notes. And if you read it, I want you to reread it. I want you to reread it with your 2025 eyes, because there are things that you might have missed the first time you read it that are there now and are more applicable to you, and you may feel more motivated to act on. So that's my message. Buy the book, give it away, or reread it. Those are your options. All right, y'all. Well, thank you for listening to another episode of the Rich and Regular podcast. If you like what you heard, you know what to do. Let us know by leaving a 5-star rating or review on any of your favorite podcast players, platforms, or drop a comment below. Keep the conversation going, and we will see y'all next week. If you like videos like this and want to see more, make sure you click subscribe and turn on notifications.